format of the evening is as follows. Firstly, I will say a few words introducing the topics, and then we're going to have two speakers, Brian Leeson from my own organisation Éirígí and Barry Monteith from the 1916 Societies. And after that, we'll open the floor to comments, questions, discussion on the topic of where now for Republicanism. So without further ado, I will start into the massive topic of 1798 Republicanism and what it means to today. Okay, so firstly I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone here this evening on behalf of both 1916 Societies and Éirígí. This event has been organised to coincide with the 225th anniversary of Wolfe Tone's death in November 1798. Whilst it might be a little too grandiose to call this evening's event historic, it's certainly highly welcome to see two serious Republican organisations, both fully within the radical Republican space that Wolfe Tone occupied, come together to celebrate the anniversary of his death. But more importantly, to try and understand what the lessons are for Republicans today as we try to forge a path forward that embraces the radicalness of the original Republican vision, as opposed to relegating it to a back seat. Okay, I'm not going to give a chronological breakdown of Wolfe Tone's life. I assume we are familiar with that already, most of us, or you can find that out elsewhere. For me, the circumstances of Tone's life are not as important as discussing the ideas that he and the United Irishmen came to hold. The Declaration of the Rights of Man in 1789, the same year as the French Revolution, had a profound impact on radical circles in Ireland. Those radical circles consisted almost exclusively of the liberal educated fringes of Protestant ascendancy. That there were radical elements in Protestant ascendancy in Ireland is of course no surprise. There were radical revolutionary tradition generations previously within the Cromwellian planters. After all, these were the descendants of the people who beheaded Charles during the English Civil Wars. Theobald Wolfe Tone, of course, grew up as part of the established church. He was somewhat of an outlier among the founding fathers of the United Irishmen. Most of them were dissenters, that is, Protestants outside of the Church of Ireland. Sure. Presbyterians and Unitarians, oh that's better, primarily. The dissenters were, as it is well documented, harshly repressed under the penal laws. They weren't as harshly repressed as Catholics, of course, but it's very important to contextualise why they were oppressed by the establishment. They fundamentally believed in liberty, both of conscience and liberty of worship, and they refused to bow to the spiritual authority of the head of the Church of England, the King. It's important to understand that traditionally, while dissenters suffered similarly to Catholics under penal laws, there was little to no solidarity with their Catholic neighbours. Catholics were broadly despised, and both Protestants and dissenters viewed their allegiance to Rome with derision. In the early discussions on liberal fringes, Catholics were seen as a threat to any progressive project. They were simply mindless drones in the service of Rome, and they would, given half a chance, massacre all non-Catholics and return a Catholic monarch to the English throne. The French Revolution in 1789 tore up this assumption. Here, the world's first radical democratic revolution took place, here in a firmly Catholic nation, with a monarch in union with Rome. The professional classes, workers and peasants joined together to overthrow the monarch in a violent revolution. It didn't stop there. The revolution began to confiscate church lands and property. Pope Pius VI announced the Declaration of the Rights of Man, but this had no impact on the revolutionaries who would go on to execute Louis XV. The impact this had on the emergent society of the United Irishmen was profound. They saw clearly, and in the most sensational way, that the revolutionary potential of the Catholic population, that in spite of the condemnation of the Pope, the dismal conditions of life for ordinary citizens would be the motivating factor in popular revolution, and not what religious denomination one belonged to. This had a huge influence on Wolfe Tone. He wrote in 1791 an argument on behalf of Catholics in Ireland. In his introduction, Tone laments the fact that there is no national government in Ireland, but an evil he describes English government with only English interests. He condemned the nationalism of Grattan and the mainstream Protestant ascendancy, who wanted more autonomy for Ireland but wanted to maintain the connection with England. While in the pamphlet he sympathises with the struggle and oppression of the Catholic population in a heartfelt way, he paraphrases Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice in his call for equality. He asks, when they are pricked, do Catholics not bleed? When they are poisoned, do they not die? There is also a firmly dialectical understanding. The Catholic population of the country firmly make up the majority. To even contemplate breaking the connection with England, the Catholic majority would need to be won over to the Republican cause. One of the quotes most associated with Tone was an expression of this understanding. If the men of property will not help us, they must fall. We will free ourselves by the aid of that large and respectable class of the community, the men of no property. This is fundamentally a class analysis of the nature of the struggle ahead. While these grandiose ideas of uniting Catholic, Protestant and Dissenter were all hotly debated and discussed within the society over dinners and banquets in Belfast and Dublin, it was at this stage all somewhat academic. It had not yet been tested in the heat of battle. How tied were Catholics to the conservatism of the Church? Over 100 years before Connolly's analysis, United Irishmen are going to discover that the seat of progress and the source of revolution is not in the brain, but the stomach. Nowhere was this more evident when revolution did break out in the southeast of the country, and no one embodies this more than Father John Murphy Boulevaux. The Catholic hierarchy, shocked by what they saw in France, coupled with the fact that Britain was beginning to grant refuge to Catholic priests escaping from the French Revolution, thought that perhaps there was to be a softening from the Brits in terms of Catholic rights. At the insistence of the local bishop, Murphy signed a declaration of loyalty. Murphy, also as late as Easter Sunday 1798, refused to give communion to known United Irishmen within his parish. The United Irishmen had grown strong in Wexford due to a huge local dissatisfaction with the price of grain, driving thousands of families into hardship. This, coupled with incessant rumours of sectarian massacres of Catholics of the country, drove the people to Father Murphy, asking him to lead the uprising locally. Faced with the dilemma of his loyalty between the Catholic hierarchy and his starving and oppressed parishioners, Murphy took the side of liberty and led the United Irishmen in one of the most iconic and successful elements of the uprising. This evening's talk is obviously called Where Next for Republicanism. I think we could do a lot worse than revisit these very basic but very fundamental ideas of liberty, equality and fraternity. As we witness a rise in reactionary nationalism, racism and fascism, and on the opposite side, further and further retreat into personal identities, ever-decreasing circles of influence and niche political ideologies, the antidote to all of this is to be found within our own rich and radical Republican tradition. That is more radical than the fundamental, what is more radical than the fundamental belief that all people are born equal and deserve to live their life and reach their full potential as equals. Wolfe Tone famously said that he set out to unite the whole of the people of Ireland, to abolish the memory of all past dissensions, and to substitute the common name of Irishmen in place of the denomination of Protestant, Catholic and Dissenter. This call to citizenship, this call was echoed 50 years later when the young Irelander Tomás Davis wrote in the national newspaper, "It is not your blood that makes you Irish, but your willingness to be part of the Irish nation." These very basic but fundamental ideas were what must drive our movement forward towards a new republic we want to build. Citizens not defined by what denomination, sexual orientation or skin colour they are, but by their willingness to finish the revolution and build a new republic for the citizens of Ireland. Good Magat. So next up we're going to have Brian Leeson, Cllr Barry, and afterwards we will have Barry Monteith. And afterwards questions and comments.
Right, I'm going to try without the mic.
Yeah.
Can everyone hear me? You hear me at the back, yeah? Cool. So first off, thank you everyone for coming in. I know life is busy for everybody. It's a Saturday evening. You know, we're not a terrible distance from Christmas, so I know I just want to thank everyone, each and every one of you, for giving up a couple of hours and making your way into town today. And for those that travel from outside of Dublin, special thank you. I'm delighted to be speaking here today. Partly on the theme, obviously, you know, it's Republicanism is something that's been very close to my heart since I was 15 years of age, which is must be 10 or 15 years ago now. And to speak here with comrades from the 1916 societies, I think there's something particularly fitting about two Republican groups coming together to mark a Republican anniversary. I mean, at the core of the Republican ideal is the concept of people working together. It's a rejection of individualism, it's a rejection of sort of survival of the fittest. it really is very central to republicanism, is the idea of people coming together. So, if individuals can't come together within organisations, and if organisations who claim to be Republican can't come together, there's something quite wrong. So, when I was sitting down to thinking about tonight and what I was going to talk about, you're spoiled for choice. There's so many topics, so many different aspects to republicanism over the last 225 years that you could spend half an hour or 2 hours talking about. I'm not a historian. I'm not going to attempt to give sort of an historical account of 1798 or of Wolfe Tone. Instead, what I'm going to try and do is sort of touch on 3 topics that I think are related, and I hope at the end they'll kind of pull together into some sort of a coherent point. And I suppose the first of that really is something Fiona touched on there, that republicanism really, in today's world, it's hard for us to grasp how revolutionary the idea of republicanism was at that time, at the time that it emerged in the French, during the French Revolution, and in the lead up to that, the sort of thinking within the Enlightenment, the idea that human beings were equal. Today most people go, yeah, that's fair, kind of sign up to equality, but in the 1790s, that was a really radical position to take. The idea that everyone, the peasant in the field and the king in the palace, were equal. This was just, it was the direct opposite of what the church was telling people. It was the direct opposite of what the political class was telling people. It was, fundamentally at odds with the entire system that had existed for centuries upon centuries. The feudal system existed from generation to generation. Power was passed from family to family. And for us, sometimes you have to step back and kind of think about, see things in their time, and at that time, the concept of equality, the core Republican principles of democracy, of justice for all, these were all unbelievably radical ideas in their time. And very central to the Irish manifestation of republicanism was the idea that the old native Irish, who were almost primarily Catholic, almost all Catholic, could unite with the newer people, those who had come in through plantation, who were largely aligned to one of the Protestant churches. And this was a truly radical idea, that these two traditions, these two separate peoples who existed on this island, would unite under one banner of republicanism. That the division of the past would be put aside, and that every person, regardless of their religious denomination, regardless of how they happen to be in Ireland, would be considered an equal citizen within a new republic. That was a truly radical idea. And it's been very central to republicanism ever since, that you were uniting all of us, men, women, Catholic, Protestant, dissenter, Muslim, Jew, those with no religion, black, white, that all of these differences, the Republic is blind to them all and does not see them, and treats each citizen, affords each citizen a fundamental set of human rights and personal rights and political rights and so forth. And that's been right at the heart of republicanism since the start. So for where we are today, one of the things I wanted to touch on is this is the 225th anniversary of 1798, it's also the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. Right, so the Good Friday Agreement was signed on the 200th anniversary of the 1798 rebellion. And as Republicans, and I'll come back to this in a while, the radical Republican tradition needs to come to terms with and analyse and understand what the Good Friday Agreement was and is, and if it is to move forward. And one of the things within the Good Friday Agreement that was highly dangerous to republicanism was the institutionalization of sectarianism. So the institutions that were set up under the Good Friday Agreement, in essence, you had to designate yourself as part of the Catholic nationalist community or the Protestant/Unionist community. And as such, it institutionalised sectarianism within the settlement within the 6 counties. Now, that in itself is a very dangerous outworking of another ideal, another concept or notion that has been floated. The idea that on this island there are 2 nations, that there is a sort of Protestant unionist nation and then there is a Catholic Republican nation. And that in essence what the Good Friday Agreement was trying to do was to accommodate these 2 nations within some form of political settlement. Now, it doesn't take a political genius to understand that that is in direct contradiction to the ideal of the Republican ideal that there is one nation on this island that doesn't see religion, that doesn't see skin colour, that doesn't see your class background, doesn't see your gender. You are a citizen who is expected, has responsibilities as a citizen and who has rights as a citizen. And the Good Friday Agreement, in institutionalising sectarianism in that way, is in direct contradiction to republicanism, and that's fair enough. Nobody, even supporters of the Good Friday Agreement, didn't say it was a Republican document. They said it was a negotiated settlement, etc., etc. But where the danger for republicanism looking forward, where the danger comes, is that mindset of the 2 nations is now within the mainstream of political thinking. And as we move towards a united Ireland, there is a real danger that those forces that have resisted republicanism and supported partition for 100 years are going to attempt to shape the nature of the reunification of Ireland. And they will attempt to shape it in that same way, right? So as opposed to saying, we will now, a reunified country, establish a new republic, they will put forward that we will establish a new Ireland, right? That they will attempt to extend to unionism, and I want it really important that we as Republicans differentiate between unionism and people who are Protestant. They're 2 fundamentally different things, right? Now, a lot of the time, unfortunately, our history, they've been kind of used almost interchangeable. Unionism is not a nation. Unionism is a political movement that was born to support the British Union with Ireland. Unionist people are not a nation, okay? To qualify as a nation, you need to meet certain requirements: a language, music, dance, sport, extensive history, an area of land which you have occupied or has been part of your national territory for centuries or millennia. That's how we qualify what nations are. But unionism is not a nation. Unionism is a political movement that was born to support the Union, and it's very closely linked to Orangism. And they were born as inherently sectarian political philosophies. They existed for the purpose of suppressing the nationalist community, the Republican community, the Catholic community, and in providing favour to those who were loyal to the Crown, loyal to the Union. As we approach, as momentum builds towards United Ireland, and there's a whole discussion to be had on that, but it would certainly seem at the moment, the momentum, we are moving in that direction. Republicans need to be very, very aware of how defeat could be snatched from the jaws of victory. Where at the very point where we could achieve the Republic, a 32-county All-Ireland Republic of the type envisaged by Tone, by the Fenians, by the Young Irelanders, in the 1916-21 revolutionary period, by Connolly, by Pearse, that Republic could be within our grasp within a generation. We need to be acutely aware that other forces, non-Republican forces, want to stymie that. They want to ensure that if Ireland is, if British jurisdiction is withdrawn from the 6 counties, they want to minimise the change. They want to ensure that what emerges may be a Republican name, maybe not, but most certainly will not be of the type of republic that Ireland's sort of revolutionaries have fought for down the centuries. So it's a really important point, I think, to make that the current political framework of the mainstream political framework is pandering to the idea that we must accommodate unionism. Republicanism cannot accommodate unionism. We absolutely must accommodate our Protestant fellow citizens in the 6 counties. Absolutely. They must be afforded all of the same rights as every other citizen in the Republic. But the idea that the unionism exists, or the unionists exist as a separate nation that are entitled to a special status or special rights, is a direct and absolute betrayal of the core Republican ideal of 1798, which is that you put religious difference aside and unite under the banner of Republic, that all citizens are equal in the eyes of the Republic. So that's just the first point I want to make. It's an important point because I believe we are moving towards reunification. That's not to say it's inevitable, it's not a done deal, but momentum is moving in that general direction. But it's very, very important, and this brings me to the second point I want to make, is the nature of that Republic. Okay? So, Republicanism it's a much abused word. It's very easy for people to claim they're Republican. Like Fianna Fáil for a long time, I don't know if they dropped it now, but for a long time it was Fianna Fáil, the Republican Party, So someone looking in, Fianna Fáil are in government, they're a Republican Party, well, by God, we must have a Republic, Donald Trump is a Republican, Cromwell was a Republican, So the term Republican can be very easily used, and it can mean very different things to different people. So for me, it's actually quite simple to measure, to establish who has been sort of true or genuine to the core Irish Republican beliefs. And for the simple reason that at each point in our history, that Republicans have come together and built a serious political movement. They've written down what they want, right? It was very helpful of them. They wrote it down extensively in the 1798 period. The Fenians declared the first republic in 1867. Another republic was declared in 1916, the Democratic Programme of 1919. These are the core historic Republican documents. And nobody can read those documents and not understand what Republicanism is about. I mean, it's literally written down in black and white in a series of documents, the evolution of Republicanism over the course of the decades and through generations. And absolutely central to that is the concept, again, of equality. And for me, for Éirígí, and I would argue for those who are from what might be considered the radical Republican tradition, equality is the absolute central element of our political philosophy. The notion that all human beings are born equal, and that the society that we live in, the economy that is associated with our society, our political system that our society functions around or within, must all work to advance equality. It's a simple idea. And for us, for this generation, there have been advances in equality. I mean, we have to recognise that, right? And also in the language that we use. So for example, if someone had to put forward the idea that everyone would have a vote in a general election 150 years ago, that was a very radical idea. If you'd have put forward the idea 60 or 70 years ago that people in this state would be entitled to attend third level university with the state paying for them to attend university, that was considered to be bonkers. Why would you be educating people? You know? The idea of universal primary school was considered to be a radical idea at one point. So for me, when we talk about equality, we need to understand that the core Republican project is about advancing not the rights of some elite class or one subsection of society, but the rights of all. And true Republicanism, I'm even reluctant to use the word radical, it might be considered radical today, but to me it makes just common sense that the political system that we seek to build, the economy that we seek to build, must advance equality and not undermine it. And where in the world we're in today, the Ireland we're in today, the current economic system is geared in directly the opposite direction. It's geared to protect those who are already wealthy. It's designed to allow those who have wealth to use that wealth to accumulate yet more wealth, and from that wealth to accumulate yet more wealth. And as we all know, there is a very close relationship between wealth and power. So if you're able to accumulate a lot of power, you're able to accumulate, a lot of wealth, it follows that you will accumulate power. And that is the challenge facing Republicans now. Yes, we have made advances. The workers' rights, for example, massive advancement on workers' rights from the start of the Industrial Revolution, from the 1790s and the early 1800s. Workers' rights have improved massively because Republicans fought for those rights and workers fought for those rights. Women's rights have improved hugely. Children's rights have improved hugely. And Republicans should take great pride in those things. They're our projects. They're the things we wanted to see happen, and they've happened. But the job is not yet done. We need to move towards a republic, not that provides nominal equality of opportunity. You know, the idea that everyone can get to university, but equality of outcome. That's the kind of economy we want to build, the kind of society we want to build, that ensures that no matter what religion you're born, no matter your skin colour, no matter your parents' wealth or their marital status, it's not that you have an abstract possibility that you might get to university. It's that you actually will get there if you do the work, you know, and that there's a huge difference, and that it's one of the fundamental differences between the kind of republicanism we are about and the kind of republicanism that Fianna Fáil is about. You know, there's a nominal equality of opportunity in essence that will allow a woman to become a boss, or a black person to become a landlord, right? Or, you know, someone who's even if you come from a poor background, if you're willing to screw everyone around you and you're willing to push everyone else down to get up, you'll get up, right? That kind of a system is an affront to republicanism. That's not genuine equality. That's like equality within a rat race, you know? It's survival of the fittest. So if you're the fittest rat, you'll get ahead. We're interested in republicanism that looks after those who aren't so fit, those who haven't got handed the opportunities through birth or through family connections or so on. So that concept of equality, again, is really absolutely central to republicanism. The equality we want, you know, sometimes language is so funny, you know, you could, radical republicanism, yes, it's radical in that sense, it's radical compared to where we are now. The idea that everybody would have a legal right to a home, and where the cost of that home was linked to your income, that's a radical idea today. It won't be a radical idea when we achieve it, you know? That's the nature of the human condition, that something is radical until it's achieved, and then people go, oh yeah, sure, that's just the natural order. That's just the way things are. So we should dream big. We should not be afraid of having ideas and policies and a vision that's big, that appears radical, and maybe even appears unachievable. What else is worth fighting for? The last point I just want to touch on is the Republican movement, the rebuilding of a Republican movement. And again, it's fitting because we're marking the anniversary of the 1798 Rising. You know, 1798, the United Irishmen were started, it was literally a couple of dozen, almost all men, almost all Protestants. A tiny number of people came together, chatting out these ideas, meeting, you know, evolved towards starting an organisation, and then it got legs and it became a very big organisation, and before they knew it, they were in a full-blown revolutionary situation. But the idea was a big idea, but was started and initiated by a very small number of people. And that's happened repeatedly throughout Irish history. Again, when Republicans started to reorganise in sort of the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, they didn't start with thousands and thousands of members of the Fenian movement, you know? It took time to build a movement. Again, when republicanism set about building in the run-up to the revolutionary period in the 1900s, 1910, it was a slow, gradual, incremental process to build a movement. For where we're at now, for Republicans, reunification remains absolutely central to the Republican project. Momentum is moving more in that direction than it was when I started out in politics 30 odd years ago. The Orange State has been dismantled through the efforts of Republicans, and it would appear that the political imperative for unionism to exist as a political movement has been significantly undermined. The Orange State, as it was 100 years ago, does not exist. And demographics are playing a role in this, a big role. There is the possibility, a real possibility, that reunification can be achieved in the relative short term. And for us as Republicans, it's about accelerating that process. It's about doing what we can to bring us to the point of reunification as quickly as possible, and that we are very heavily influencing the type of republic, the type of Ireland that emerges, that it is a republic and that it's a radical republic. And in that regard, it's really important for us all to understand that constitutional change only comes very, very rarely. The Act of Union in 1800 took 120 years for this state to break out of it. There's been no real significant constitutional change since then. Good Friday Agreement, limited constitutional change, but not in the big sense. And all of the forces of conservatism want to stop change. Kind of the clue is in their name, conservatism. They want to conserve the status quo. When change starts to happen, when that immovable or apparently immovable block starts to move, when that huge boulder starts to shift, it wants to stop moving, okay? That's the nature of these things. So if in the next 10, 15, 20 years, a scenario develops where constitutional change is possible, the forces of conservatism, who do I mean by that? The London government, the political establishment in the south, unionism, nationalist parties in the north who are nationalist in name alone, right? They will all want to minimise that change. If United Ireland is coming, they're going to want essentially just to create a 32 county version of this state. We have to understand here in our dozens and beyond here in our hundreds and in our thousands, that when that opportunity, when that window opens, when that possibility of change emerges, when the boulder starts to move, we will have a very short opportunity to push it as far as we can, as quick as we can. And if we don't, if the forces of conservatism succeed in creating a 32 county free state, it'll be a 32 county free state for decades to come. It's the nature of how these things go throughout all of history. That when change starts, a window opens, you have an opportunity to push for maximum change in that window, and then the window closes and things start to solidify and settle down and dig in and concretise. And for us, as we're looking forward, the single most important thing we can all do here is build a Republican movement, a new Republican movement. And in this, I'm not talking about building a new Republican organisation, right? Which is a lot of times Republicans think, oh well, a new Republican movement means a new outfit, a new grouping. A true movement is a movement of the people. That's the challenge, is to build a Republican people, to educate tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people on what the real Republican, the radical Republican position is, to win their loyalty to that, and that they then become the engines for change. Of course we need organisations to do that, and we need organisations to come together, we need like-minded people to come together. But we need to build that movement, and that movement needs to have people in the Irish language movement, the trade union movement, women's liberation movement, in every aspect of our society, through community groups, cultural groups, everywhere where Irish people gather, the Republican ideal should gather. That's how you build a movement, and that's the challenge facing us for my analysis, my critique of where we're at, is that there is a situation emerging now where the space will open up for that kind of radical Republican movement to emerge. We're 25 years past the Good Friday Agreement. I think most sensible Republicans are no longer sort of fixated on that. They understand what it was. They understand its consequence, but are now moving towards how do we build a new movement, how do we build popular support for a radical Republican vision, and you know, and how do we do that not in 10 or 20 years time, but now. And that's why I think tonight, meetings like tonight are really important to get that conversation going outside of kind of each organisation's own little comfortable audience. You know, engage with our like-minded groups and start fleshing that out as to how we build that truly a true Republican movement that can see constitutional changes on the horizon, and that we need to be organised, really well organised, for when that change. One, to make the change happen as quick as possible, but also to make sure that when it happens, it is the maximum level of change is achieved, and that republic will deliver housing, healthcare, education, and all of those other things that every citizen needs to fulfil their individual potential. That is all that republicanism has ever been about, is to allow every citizen, regardless of how wealthy their parents were, of their religion, of their sexual orientation. It's irrelevant to the republic. The republic provides you with the tools to get ahead: housing, healthcare, education, and those other services you need to make the most of your life. And in return, you serve the republic. It's a simple relationship, rights and responsibilities. And it's been, as I say, thankfully, other people wrote down these very solid ideas at different intervals over the last 225 years. And those ideas remain as relevant, in my opinion, today as they did at the time they were written. I want to just finish one small quote from the 1867 proclamation of the Republic. I think it's fitting because we are here remembering the past. Remember the past, look well to the future, and avenge yourselves by giving liberty to your children in the coming struggle for human freedom. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brian. We're going to save comments and questions until the end, okay? So we're going to move on to Barry's contribution next.
Can you hear me? Yep.
If you want it.
You all right?
Okay, these guys don't need
Well, a couple of things before start. The last time I was in this room, we mentioned, was as a book launch. A good friend of mine wrote a few books, Shane Kenna. I'm sure you know he's well known, Shane, Dr. Shane Kenna. The last time I was in this room was the launch of his book, War in the Shadows. So, just we mentioned it. Shane sadly passed away at the age of 33, as many as you know, and to me has been a big miss because he wasn't afraid to highlight the history of radical thought, the history of radical republicanism, and he didn't shy from what many historians have shied away from the past, even his work around the Invincibles, which many historians have almost written out of history as this was sort of beyond the pale, their actions and things like that. And again, people like that are invaluable, especially in writing our history, because we don't write our history, it gets written for us, as we all know. Whenever I get asked to do this, I'm just 1798 or the 1790s. I done it for my A levels, which would be Leaving Cert in the 26th. So I was a wee bit conscious that my old A level teacher, history teacher, Don Flynn, might shout if I didn't get it all right. So I was glad to see whenever Fiona sent me a copy of what she had, so she had covered the historical bit of it, so it wasn't so bad. The bit I wanted to cover was a bit that I think isn't covered an awful lot in our historical analysis, and it's the counter-revolution. And the counter-revolution of the 1790s. And I think what Brian and Fiona said, it is very difficult to comprehend how radical the 1790 period, the 1780s, 1790s, and early 1800s was in Republican thought and in Irish politics. It was like nothing ever before. And that's very hard for us to comprehend, as Brian has said, because we've grown up with it, and it's become the norm. But those thoughts and those ideals rocked the establishment across the world to its very core. And I think one of the biggest things that it did, and in the 20th anniversary of 1788, there was a lot of reanalysis was done, and a lot of people were rewriting history about what it was really about, and they talked about equality and fraternity and all excellent things. But the thing that they tried, or in some sense started to airbrush out of 1788 and out of the 1780s, was to break the connection with England. And it became very trendy to talk about the radicalism and Presbyterianism and all this type of thing, and that they were ahead of their time and all that there. But what was lost is to break the connection with England, because it was safe to remember without remembering that particular part of it. And John Murphy was one of the main historians in sort of highlighting that, and he talked about the first time entrance, that the biggest thing with the 1780s was the first time entrance of the plain people onto the stage of Irish history. That it wasn't the kings or the Gaelic ascendancy or the Protestant ascendancy or the kings or the generals or whatever who were making history. It was ordinary people. It was the ordinary Catholic Defender associations. It was the ordinary dissenter, the ordinary farmer, the ordinary labourer. That was the first time that had happened in Irish history. It was the first time it had happened probably in European history, following the French Revolution. And what he talked about was that it promoted egalitarianism, and the bit that always stuck in my head was the smashing of deference. And when we talk about equality, we sometimes throw it out there without actually studying what it means. Deference has been to the detriment of humanity for centuries, for generations. And what is deference? It's knowing your place. And the capitalist system cannot survive without deference. It cannot survive if people don't know their place. And that is the same in the labour market, in the industry, it's the same in society, it's the same in every aspect of human work or human endeavour. It only survives if people know their place. The English system, when you think about it, they nearly joke about it. Talk about deference, know your betters. It's laughed about in Irish history about tugging the forelock. I don't have a forelock to tug it anymore. And this was the first time that this was not going to be accepted. And that ordinary people were saying enough and no more. And this shook the establishment to its foundation. None more so than the church, the Catholic Church in particular, who were absolutely petrified. As Fiona mentioned earlier, that if this could happen in France, which was the strongest Catholic power in Europe, this could happen anywhere. And the church resolved that this was not going to survive. So the counter-revolution began, not just with England, but in partnership with the Catholic entities in Ireland. And history began to be rewritten. And the Act of Union, and I always associate Emmet's rebellion as the same rebellion as the 1788. It's coming from the same thought process. It's the same, many of the same folk involved. And what happens afterwards, and it's a thing that's not touched much in Irish history, is O'Connell, the so-called Great Liberator. But what O'Connell does is completely sectarianises Irish society and makes it all about Catholic emancipation. Something which was probably going to happen anyway. The British, within the British system, the need to segregate on the basis of religion was not as necessary, or becoming less necessary than it had been before. And because there were issues in England and places they got there for equality, they were starting to the sort of reds in the bed, as we talk about in America. It was Catholics were the big conspiracy with the English mindset for many years, going back to Guy Fawkes and all that sort of stuff. But that was starting to ease. So most of this stuff was going to happen anyway. But O'Connell came to the fore, and O'Connell was nostalgic. O'Connell was very dismissive of anything to do with 1788, very dismissive to the Irishman. And his whole analysis was with Catholic emancipation and repeal the Union. And you will hear people talking about the repeal campaign. That wasn't a good thing. but it wasn't a good thing. What he meant by repeal the Union was bring back the ascendancy Parliament, which had been there before up until the 70s, was known as Grattan's Parliament. Because he wanted to sit, he wanted to be an MP, he wanted to be Prime Minister, or whatever you want to call it, of an Irish Parliament under the Crown. He was instrumental in destroying our language. He openly spoke that the language of modern language and modern society could only be facilitated with the English tongue. The Catholic Church backed him to the core. And the Catholic Church was very instrumental in removing our language things. You know, when people always talk about the language disappearing after the famine, the language had virtually disappeared in many parts of Ireland before that. Unless always remember, the Church had control of education in many parts of Ireland, most of Ireland, up until that point, or before that point. So what you had was O'Connell and the monster rallies. And I said to Paul, you know, before the thing, monster rallies. Now, even the English, in their reporting of some of these rallies, talked about tens of thousands of people. You know, there's talk that there was 1 million people at a rally in 1843. I don't know whether there was or there wasn't. But the fact that numbers, imagine those numbers assembling to demand England out of Ireland. They couldn't stay. So that had to be steered down a path, and the path was steered down Catholic emancipation or civil rights and repeal the Union, home rule, effectively bringing back home rule. And that is exactly the same counter-revolution that happened after the risings in 16, and exactly the same in the counter-revolution after the 70s, 80s and 90s in the most recent phase of Republican struggle, where the Republican ideal and the Republican message is reinterpreted and lied about and told over, and different parts of it are taken forward. And when people then, like O'Connell, claimed that 98 was misguided, he claimed that people like Tone, that they're pawns of the English, and that what really 1798 was about was reform and not freedom. And they convinced the Presbyterian section of our population. And again, people sometimes hear Republicans talk and say, how do Presbyterians go from being so radical to being so conservative 200 years later? Because the counter-revolution in the early 1800s pushed it very, very hard that that's actually what the rebellion was about removing the corruption of Grattan's Parliament, and that your equality and your rights as an individual would be protected by the Mother Parliament in London. So there's an awful lot of work done in the what's now the 690s, but in North West Ireland at that time, through what become the Unionist sort of media, of saying that 1798 was successful because it actually delivered the removal of the oppression of the Anglican Church over the Presbyterian Church. So that's how that starts to erode, and it starts to erode the radicalism within Presbyterianism. And it's that slow but sure seeping away of people's radical thought of how they see themselves moving forward, how they see the betterment of the condition, that England starts to completely remove it. And you think a group in Irish history that's talked about but not analysed that maybe as much as some is Young Irelanders are out. And Young Irelanders were involved in a lot of stuff with O'Connell, their allies with O'Connell, but eventually they saw through it and they broke from O'Connell in the 1940s. And they broke from O'Connell because O'Connell was undermining the message of 1788. And the Earl Oldwell, the Young Irelanders, it was they who started to write the history of people like Tone, William Orr, McCracken, Unionist Protestant Republicans, because it had been written out of the Irish narrative. And they were successful in doing so. It was they who wrote many of the stories and the songs that we all know today about 1798. Who fears to speak of 98? And it was about that. Who fears to speak about what really happened? Who fears to speak about what it was really about? And they were successful in keeping that for a generation. People always talk about history in Ireland and that we're obsessed with history and why do you keep talking about history? Because whether we like it or not, anniversaries have had massive impacts on our history. The 50th anniversary of 1788 fell in the middle of genocide of our people. So it didn't have the impact politically that it would have had. The Young Irelanders attempted a rebellion which was fairly insignificant. But in 1898, the Fenians drove in Ireland, and they drove it hard about 1898. And you can see it in towns across Ireland. 1898 was a big monument built in time, loads of monuments to the United Irishmen in lots of towns, and it was used by the Fenians to drive forward their message of separation, break the connection with it. And we talk about, the Proclamation talks about 6 times in our history, but many of the open revolutions or the military revolutions are connected. As I always think of you, 1888, 1803 are the same revolution. Likewise, 1848 is essentially the same revolution. 1867 and 1916 are essentially the same revolution. They're the Fenian revolutions. And the next big uprising from the people, 1916 runs into the 20s, and that is the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And those 3 major uprisings from the Irish people, in revolutionary terms, all face the same reinterpreting of what it was about. Talked about 25 years ago of the Good Friday Agreement. Since the Good Friday Agreement, the Republican struggle and the revolutionary thought of the volunteers and the Republican people and the Irish people of the 1970s, 80s and 90s has been reinterpreted as a struggle for civil rights. It has been reinterpreted as better housing, better jobs, and it was a success, it was a victory. That is not what the volunteers of the IRA committed themselves, either in 1970, 1980, or in the 1920s. They committed themselves to break the connection with England. They committed themselves to an Irish republic, to an Irish sovereign independent state. No matter how much people try and tell us that they didn't, yes they did. And we must always say it, and now we'll say it without apology. Because we hear, sometimes you have to listen. You go, where does this come out of? And you will hear representatives, they're probably just finished an RTE now, and it sounds all so plausible. That's not why our Republican dead and our patriot dead are on the ground. Nobody in the world goes out to give their lives for civil rights. It doesn't happen. You may get killed in the civil rights struggle, but you don't dedicate your life to fight for civil rights. Nowhere in the world is civil rights is a political campaign. Republicanism is a revolution. Republicanism is about freeing our country and creating a new empire, creating a new sovereign independent state. So the exact same things, to me, that's is the bit that we need to study as a counter-revolution, where history is rewritten for us. Happened in the early 1800s, happened after 1916, where people were told, oh, yep, this was all about a 26-county free state. You know, somehow this is a victory. You know, the sacrifices that was made in the 70s, 80s and 90s in the late 20th century, that this is all about civil rights. You know, Catholics can get a job now, wasn't it all great? Fair play to the IRA. That's not what the IRA fought for, that's not what Republican people suffered for. But those 3 periods in history, Republicans shook the empire. And shook the empire till it's cold. And almost won at different times in our history. And what at also those times, what the Irish people were able to do was put out massive numbers. And I allude to the monster rallies. You know, every reactionary force fears people on the street. And the monster rallies have become mythic in O'Connell's talk. But I come back to if those thousands and thousands of people had been demanding freedom, the British could not have ruled Ireland. They'd have been gone. And that's what we always have to watch for, is a counter-revolution steers the body politic or down different routes, steers it away from breaking the connection with England. You know, you go to 1981, over 100,000 people attend the funeral of Bobby Sands. People up in open revolt against the rule of Britain and Ireland. And it's steered that he didn't die to break the connection with England, he died for a better deal inside the 6 countries. I attended the Palestinian event today in Dublin, or in the city centre, like many of us did. And I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was a brilliant crowd. But I was also saddened. Because why can't we put that numbers in the street for Irish freedom? I hear thousands of people today screaming about the rights for freedom of Palestine, and it's brilliant, and it's great, and I'm proud to be there, and I'll be there hopefully there next week and in the future. Why are people not on the street demanding freedom of their own country? I hear people on the platform today talking about the rights of Palestine to be free, the rights of self-determination, and I'm not going to pick out names, but you know, you feel like screaming at them. Do you not realise what's going on in your own country? Now I know we're there on one issue and we're there on the Palestinian issue, but those same folk are not as vocal about the freedom of our country. And they say it's not as simple as that. It's more complicated. That's exactly what the Zionists say about Israel and the freedom of Palestine. It's not that simple. It's not as easy as you say there. It is that simple. If it's simple in Palestine, it's simple in Ireland. And to me, that's the challenge, that's the move forward for Republicanism, is we need to create that demand, we need to create that appetite where unity is the focus of all our efforts. Freedom is the focus of all our efforts. Because I'm not just as convinced that Irish unity is coming. I think it probably is coming, but I'm not convinced. Because there have been chances in the past and they've been missed. And everybody's listening before, I always say, they've been missed before. They could be missed again. And once they're missed for a long time. This generation has to take it. This generation has to go out there and say, how can we get there? Could we cope? Like the crowd was there today, there's thousands there. And it was everywhere. It was crazy, for want of a better term. There's people talking in one corner, there's people shouting in another corner, there's people doing all this. Could we as Republicans actually handle that? Could we handle 10,000 people demanding freedom? Because sometimes I think we couldn't, because we'd get all panicked. What are they talking about over there? Who's over there? What's that? How long, man? How long? Look at them, it's there. No, they're not even open the platform. You know, there was different wee bits in the protest. There was people chanting things here and chanting there. And sometimes you think, could we actually handle it? And that's the challenge, I think, for us, is we have to create it, we have to make it, and we have to let it run. And we have to let the people have ownership of it. We don't own it, I don't own it. The people own it, and that's the most important thing for us. And it's great the connection thing, and that's the theme of what I'm saying tonight. And to me, that's the legacy of Wolfe Tone, the legacy of the United Irishmen, and it's still the legacy of all of our Republican generations. It's break the connection with England.